all hearing witnesses, and those in attendance. In light of the financial difficulties confronting the Postal Service, we have called today's hearing to explore the current economic impact on various Workshare discounts and to examine whether these pricing structures correctly incentivize mailers. The hearing will also investigate the issues related to products that do not currently cover their costs. The Chair, the Ranking Member, and the Subcommittee members will each have 5 minutes to make opening statements, and all members will have 3 days to submit statements for the record. Again, welcome. As you are undoubtedly aware, the Postal Service continues to confront a dire financial situation. While the Postal Service has recently revealed some good news that it is doing better than previously anticipated by some $1.2 billion, the organization is still on track to lose approximately $7 billion by the end of this year. And this will be on top of a cumulative loss of nearly $12 billion over the previous 3 fiscal years. Much of the Postal Service's recent financial difficulties can be attributed to the rise of electronic communication and the corresponding dramatic decline in mail volume, as well as the nationwide economic downturn, and in some ways statutorily imposed pre-funding of future retiree health benefit obligations. One of the most important tools that the Postal Service currently has to deal with its financial difficulties is its enhanced pricing flexibility, as provided by the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. However, utilization of this flexibility has not been an easy matter, as the Postal Service and others have noted. In the given market environment, increasing rates must be justified, balanced, and reasonable, since such changes could further accelerate the pace of mail volume declines. Recent reports and studies have identified several pricing areas that should be revisited and further explored as opportunities to generate more revenue. Today, this subcommittee convenes to discuss pricing issues relating to Workshare discounts and products that are currently considered as not covering their costs. First, with respect to Workshare discounts, the Postal Regulatory Commission's fiscal year 2009 ACD, their annual compliance determination, found that 30 Workshare discounts exceeded their avoided costs, exceeded their associated costs. According to the PRC, 17 of these discounts were justified, while the remaining 13 were not properly justified and should be realigned at the next general price adjustment. Toward that end, I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on these particular discounts and other Workshare-related topics, especially given that approximately 80% of all USPS mail is now Workshared. With such a large portion of mail being Workshared, it is crucial that Workshare discounts be priced to maximize revenue and efficiency of the entire postal industry, especially during such bleak financial times. In addition to discussing aspects of work sharing, which is the amount of prep that is being done by mailers in advance of handing the mail off to the post office, and also Workshare-related discounts, today's hearing also touches on the subject of postal products deemed not to cover their actual costs. Highlighted by both the PRC's annual compliance determination and the Government Accountability Office's April 12 report, the Postal Service lost, in the aggregate, approximately $1.7 billion in fiscal year 2009 due to some 14 postal products that are not covering their costs of delivery. Although some of these products might be appropriately priced below cost for public policy reasons, many stakeholders have begun to call for more accurate pricing of these mailings, especially given the current financial status of the Postal Service. Toward that end, the subcommittee looks forward to an informative discussion exploring the Postal Service's pricing policies, approaches to data collection, and utilization as it relates to products that have been found to fall short in covering their actual costs. Today's hearing will provide us an opportunity to hear from the Postal Service, the Postal Regulatory Commission, our mailers, affected unions, and well-respected economists and scholars on these vital topics. It is my hope that the testimony and feedback we receive from today's witnesses will provide the committee with information on the value of these important programs in a Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act environment that incentivizes the Postal Service to make a profit and to alter its business model in order to meet the current and future challenges. Again, I thank each of you for being with us this afternoon, and I look forward to your participation. I now yield to 5 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate holding the hearing, and to all the witnesses who are here today, I appreciate your patience in waiting for us after roll call votes, and I appreciate your testimony here today and taking the time in preparation for it. It's my understanding that the United States Postal Service is expecting to file an exigency rate case in July, and so this hearing's timing is significant. The world of work-sharing discounts provided to businesses which perform duties that the Postal Service would have to otherwise perform, and cost attribution of postal products is extremely challenging. On a basic level, it is understood that work-sharing discounts should only be as big as cost savings provided, and that the postal products should be covering their attributable costs. It is also equally understood, however, that the methodology for determining attributable costs is far from an exact science. Many of these money-losing products are not standalone pieces of mail, but are in fact responsible for a great deal of additional postal communication and consequently revenue. This is the danger of taking certain products in isolation. We must also bear in mind that products are only worth what the market is willing to pay. One cannot make the assumption that volume will stay the same if the price of the product is increased. This price sensitivity is something that we need to dive deeper into and must be studied very carefully. Hopefully this will be done leading up to the review of the rate case. Additionally, discussions of attributable costs are incomplete without a few facts regarding institutional costs, which are paramount in this case. Obviously, in every finance class, they usually spend time addressing the potential dangers of eliminating programs, outlets, or products that are not profitable. But when these programs or products are discontinued, the institutional or fixed costs that were originally allocated to the shutdown program get redistributed to the remaining products, which makes products that were previously barely profitable suddenly not profitable. I hope that the agencies understand this. This does not mean unprofitable programs can't be shut down, but it means you have to understand the total financial implication and not just the cost savings in that bubble. It also means that the United States Postal Service itself, in this case, must analyze its own efficiencies. While the United States Postal Service may be the most efficient postal system in the world, the truth is that there is no postal system like this anywhere in the world. And this hearing could help establish some very basic building blocks for knowledge on these extraordinarily complex issues. I would caution against jumping to conclusions over what we hear today. The world of rate setting and adjusting has massive implications for the trillion-dollar mailing and paper industries, and any congressional intervention must be done with great caution. With that, we look forward to this hearing, and again, I appreciate the witnesses for their time and preparation today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership in helping us to restructure the Postal Service and for conducting a thorough investigation of options for cost savings and revenue enhancement. This hearing will examine Workshare discounts and postage pricing for certain products that do not cover the cost of delivery. The Postal Regulatory Commission has investigated the Postal Service's Workshare program and found that 30 Workshare discounts are actually costing as much as they save, meaning that the Postal Service could be reducing losses by adjusting those discounts. This represents an opportunity to achieve cost savings without service cuts. PRC also identified 61 Workshare discounts that are profitable for the Postal Service. In other words, the discounts for these Workshares are less expensive than the cost the Postal Service would otherwise incur by processing the mail itself. Though some have condemned the practice, as well as the underlying statute that permits the Postal Service to earn profits on these Workshares, it seems to me we ought not to necessarily be discouraging the Postal Service from seeking more opportunities like these to make a profit when it's losing so much money. There is no inherent virtue in creating a Workshare discount that precisely matches the cost of the Postal Service processing the mail itself. In fact, it's conceivable that the Postal Service could earn a profit through less discounted Workshares by setting a price that still saves costs for private sector partners participating in Workshare. We should protect the Postal Service's ability to make profits on Workshares while supporting the PRC's oversight to ensure that the Postal Service is not losing money on Workshares. Although the Workshare program was intended to be temporary, if the Postal Service can use it to achieve efficiencies, it should not be curtailed or eliminated at this time. Pricing for periodicals and mail flats represent another opportunity to increase Postal Service revenue. In 2006, Congress imposed a price cap on all classes of mail, which is linked to the Consumer Price Index. We should consider revisiting that cap to allow the Postal Service to reduce losses associated with mailing magazines and mail flats like catalogs. With these two product categories alone losing over $1.2 billion in FY 2009, we need to provide authority to adjust prices as part of a broader Postal Service restructuring. It's unrealistic to expect the Postal Service to function like a business when Congress has imposed pricing restrictions that do not apply to private sector businesses and competition. Again, I want to thank you, Chairman Lynch, for your ongoing leadership to identify policy options for Postal Service restructuring. Based on today's hearing, I believe it's clear the Postal Service should maintain its authority to make profits from workshares and should receive additional authority to adjust certain mail prices to avert losses from magazines and mail flats. And I look forward to the testimony.
I thank the gentleman. It is the custom before this committee that all witnesses to provide testimony shall be sworn. Could I ask you both to rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to this subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, let the record show that each of the witnesses has answered in the affirmative. I'm now going to just offer a brief introduction of our witnesses. Ms. Mara Robinson was named Vice President of Pricing at the United States Postal Service in June of 2008. In this role, Ms. Robinson is responsible for the pricing of all postal and non-postal products and services, and for providing analytical support and evaluation of all contract pricing and new product initiatives. Mr. John Waller is the Director of the Office of Accountability and Compliance at the Postal Regulatory Commission. Mr. Waller leads the Commission's analysis of Postal Service pricing proposals and oversees technical support for studies including measurement of the Postal Service's performance and impact assessments of major Postal Service network reorganizations. Each of you will have 5 minutes for an opening statement. When you see the light turn red, you should probably wrap up. Ms. Robinson, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. Would you check your microphone just to make sure that's on and pull it closely to you? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Today I will discuss the Postal Service's approach to setting prices, the impact of the Postal Accountability...
Mr. Chairman, could I...
Closer.
Yeah, we cannot hear you.
Right.
Today I will discuss the Postal Service...
Can you speak into the microphone? There you go.
Today I will discuss the Postal Service approach to setting prices, the impact of the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006, and our Workshare discount philosophy. The Postal Act of 2006 enabled the Postal Service to bring new products and services to market more quickly. The additional pricing flexibility helps us better manage our products and services and make them an even greater value in the marketplace. The new postal law provided different pricing rules for mailing and shipping services. Prices for mailing services may not exceed the rate of inflation based on the Consumer Price Index for the previous 12 months for any class of mail, while price changes for shipping services must produce sufficient revenue above a price floor that covers attributable costs for each competitive product. Last year, the Postal Service announced that mailing service prices would not increase in 2010. Due to the severe economic recession and the electronic diversion of mail, volume has dropped drastically, and we were concerned that a price increase would further contribute to this decline. Instead, to generate additional revenue and stimulate mail growth, the Postal Service implemented pricing incentives, seasonal sales, and a flat-rate shipping options. Overall, our goal is to foster a long-term pricing strategy that promotes an efficient and cost-effective postal system and to promote mail volume retention and growth through pricing and product innovations. We must use postal pricing as a tool to encourage customers to stay in the mail. The mail has great power to deliver customer value and has a demonstrated ability to help customers grow their business. After experiencing a year in which we lost an unprecedented 25 billion mail pieces, the Postal Service's current focus must be on retaining and growing volume. We know that our largest customers are increasingly more likely to mail less if postage prices increase. Among our financial challenges are products that fail to cover their attributable costs. This is clearly a cause for concern. No business can afford to lose, on an ongoing basis, billions of dollars on a few products. However, by the same token, No business can afford to take short-term actions that will create long-term, irreparable damage to customers. Improving the financial contribution of money-losing products requires focus on both the revenues generated by the product through the prices charged, as well as the costs of providing the product. Recently, we announced that we intend to increase prices moderately in early 2011 using the exigent price change mechanism provided in the PAEA. However, as we move forward, we are working to strike a balance between addressing cost coverage issues and maintaining our customer base. There are no easy solutions. Prices for below-cost products will be increased to address the cost challenges. However, we intend to do so in a judicious and measured way to improve financial performance over time. The Postal Service has long offered its customers choices through its work-sharing program. If a customer pre-sorts and pre-barcodes mail, transports it closer to its ultimate destination, or performs other functions that reduce the Postal Service's costs, they pay a lower price based on the costs the Postal Service does not incur. Work-shared mail is among our most profitable mail. The cost coverage for work-shared first-class mail letters was 291% in fiscal year 2009, the highest for any product. For each dollar the Postal Service spends to process, transport, and deliver work-share first-class mail letters, we receive almost $3 in revenue. When a discount is discussed in pennies, it's easy to portray changes as minor. However, when you view those pennies in terms of the postage actually paid by our customers, a clearer view of the effects of changes in work-share discounts emerges. A 1-cent increase in prices translates to an average of $9 million in additional postage annually for each of our 5 largest customers. In an environment of tight budgets, cost-cutting, and ample alternatives to the use of the mail, the potential effect of additional expenditures of this magnitude could be severe. A viable postal service can only exist if we offer prices and products that are a good customer value. Over the last 30 years, stamp prices have increased at about the rate of inflation and remain a true bargain in today's world. Our mail system cannot survive unless it remains affordable for everyone. If today's actions short-sightedly accelerate the pace of electronic diversion and the search for alternatives to the mail, it will be difficult to continue to provide the American people with the postal services that they need. In closing, during tough economic times, we continue to achieve record-level cost reductions, maintain high service level, and attain successes with new initiatives for incremental revenue generation. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Mr. Waller, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Appropriate pricing can sustain operations and provide postal services to the nation. To help generate new revenue, the Commission has already approved 40 service proposed pricing initiatives this fiscal year, while providing the transparency and review required by law. This builds on the long tradition of the Commission working with the Postal Service and mailing community to develop work-share discounts that over the years have increased volume, revenue, and most importantly, net revenue. That experience was incorporated into current law when work-sharing discounts were defined as being provided to mailers for the pre-sorting, pre-barcoding, handling, or transportation of mail as further defined by the Postal Regulatory Commission. When mailers perform one or more of these functions prior to mailing, the service can avoid certain transportation and mail processing costs. If work-share discounts equal avoided costs, then other mailers are not disadvantaged and the service retains the same unit contribution to institutional costs. But when discounts exceed avoided costs, contribution can be lost and a mailer has price incentives to perform postal functions that the service can perform at a lower cost. The PAEA explicitly requires the Commission to ensure that this does not occur unless certain specified exceptional circumstances exist. The difficult computational task is to identify the cost of handling mail that is similar except for being work-shared. As an example, consider a first-class letter mailing that satisfies automation requirements and is pre-sorted to the 5-digit zip code level. The average Postal Service unit cost for processing and delivering this mail is 8.7 cents. However, without pre-sorting and other Workshare requirements, the cost is 18.2 cents. The 9.5 difference is the avoided cost. Methodologies for determining avoided costs have been developed over the years and continue to be refined through public hearings with input from the Postal Service and other interested parties. Current avoided costs are determined each fiscal year as part of the annual compliance determination process to ensure timely detection of discounts that are too large and need to be realigned. As noted by the chairman, for fiscal year 2009, the Commission found that 13 work-sharing discounts exceeded avoided costs and were not justified by the service, with exceptions outlined in the PAEA. The Commission has determined that the best time or most appropriate time to realign these 13 questionable discounts is in the upcoming exigent rate case. Last year, the service had a loss of $3.8 billion, with $1.7 due to 14 market-dominant products that did not cover their attributable costs and contribute to the institutional costs. $1.5 billion came from periodicals, standard mail flats, and standard mail non-flat machinables and parcels. All of these products involve flats, for which the Postal Service has a long-standing cost control problem. Standard mail flats were given less than average increases for the last 2 years, and there has been a rapid increase in losses from that product, with a near tripling in 2009. While this pricing strategy has been given an opportunity to succeed, the Commission has cautioned against continued less than average increases for loss-making products without a plan for how net revenue is helped over the long run. First class and bound print and matter flats do cover attributable costs, so the standard flat mail losses are not an unsolvable problem. Standard mail non-flat machinables and parcels received significant price increases of 16.4% last May and 9.7% the year before, well above the average. But more work is needed to fully align revenue and costs. Periodical has not covered its attributable costs since 1997. The Commission and the Postal Service have a study underway to find out what some of the chronic cost and revenue imbalance causes are. It should be completed this year and sent to the Congress for consideration. The Commission has emphasized that financial difficulties of the service is a multifaceted problem, not just a matter of the prices, but of operating costs, legacy costs, business model, and a changing mail market. As solutions are sought, the Commission is responsible providing transparency on revenue and costs. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I'll yield myself 5 minutes for questions, but before I do, well, why don't we do this? I would like to, before I move to questions and begin my time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the statement from the National Newspaper Association, which highlights their concerns over postal pricing for in-county newspapers, be included for the record. Hearing no objections, so ordered. All right. Just so this doesn't get too technical, I want to, first of all, try to offer a little bit of an explanation to the folks who are unfamiliar with this process about Workshare. Workshare simply refers to the portion of work that mailers conduct when they bring their mail, before they bring their mail to the post office. And that can involve pre-sorting. If a mailer has a lot of mail and they bring it to the post office and it's pre-sorted, it can be barcoded, it can be bundled in zip codes and actually transported privately to the Postal Service rather than picked up, so that private mailers are doing a lot of work that the Postal Service might have otherwise done, and that's what we call Workshare. And the idea of these discounts is really trying to determine what the value of that pre-sorting, bundling, delivery, barcoding, the things that they've done for the Postal Service to make the delivery more efficient. And so we try to give them a discount that exactly matches the service that they've provided. The problem begins when on the one hand, sometimes we overcompensate the mailers. We give them more of a discount than the value of the services that they provided, which ends up in a boon or a windfall, some say, to the mailers, and an inefficiency or a lack of valuing of the service provided by postal employees. On the other hand, sometimes we shortchange our mailers and we don't give them enough of a discount. And in that instance, you actually have an antitrust problem or a situation where the Postal Service is actually retaining revenue or taking advantage of the mailers. So that's where we have these differences. And hopefully that's a little bit clearer than just using terms like Workshare and cost avoidance and other things like that. But let me ask you, during the Postal Service's March 2nd, 2010 announcement of its new business plan, the Post Office stated that their goal was to have all products covering their costs. Now, we have several general categories of mail that actually cost more to deliver than what we charge. And so those products do not meet the cost of delivery based on the rates that we charge. How do you plan to meet your goal of having all products covering their cost by 2020 based on the situation we have right now? Ms. Robinson.
As I've indicated, there are problems with some of our products that do not recover our costs, and that's not a situation that is sustainable for any organization. The Postal Service is looking at all alternatives to grow mail volume, to increase our revenue from those products, and to operate with those products as efficiently as possible. More practically, we're going to be addressing the pricing issues through, in part, an exigent price increase, which will be filed later this year, in which we intend to have a moderate price increase that will, in part, address the cost challenges within products such as standard mail, flats, and periodicals.
Okay, let me interrupt there. So we have flats, which you've got magazines and catalogs, things like that are not currently paying for themselves. We're subsidizing the delivery of those products. They're awkward, but large. They're odd sizes. Then give me another area where we're mispricing.
The three largest categories where you're not covering costs would be periodicals, magazines, and newspapers.
Right.
Standard mail flats, which is typically catalogs and other large paper-sized pieces of advertising mail, and standard mail parcels, which are lightweight parcels.
Okay, how are we going to bring those up to a category where they pay for themselves?
We're looking at increasing the product prices over time.
Okay.
We are going to be doing it in a measured way over approximately a 10-year horizon.
All right.
However, we do need to address the customers' concerns that we don't severely damage their businesses by price increases that are too large.
Okay, let me ask you, and my time is running out. You say in your testimony that through this exigent pricing or emergency pricing adjustment that we're going to do in 2011, that you're going to institute a, quote, moderate increase. Give me a hint on what you mean by moderate. Is there a percentage that you could attach to that, or something that I would be able to divine what the cost might be as opposed to being moderate?
The Postal Service's Board of Governors is going to make that decision, and we're looking at balancing the impact on our customers versus the Postal Service's need for additional revenue and to address the cost challenges. Do
you have a moderate range? Can you give me a range of between what and what that might cost? Are you afraid of scaring people?
That's a decision that's going to be made by the Postal Service's Board of Governors, and they've not made that decision yet. Okay.
All right. I've used up all my time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Robinson, you say in your testimony here, if I'm reading it right, at least on page 5 of the copy that I have here, it says Workshare mail is profitable. There are many myths about work sharing, including an oft-cited observation that if discounts are greater than avoided costs, then it must be unprofitable. Nothing could be further from the truth. Despite the sometimes vocal rhetoric, Workshare mail is among the most profitable mail in the Postal Service to handle. So you cited 3 areas where you say it's not profitable, and yet in your testimony you also say it's very profitable. What are those areas where maybe we're not giving enough discount. You cited 3 where we're maybe going the opposite direction, but what are we overcharging for?
Well, I'm not sure I would characterize it as overcharging. For example, in work-shared first-class mail letters, typical pieces of bills, statements, correspondence you would receive from other businesses. The cost coverage...
But we're not giving them enough discount? Is that what we're saying? Because as the chairman pointed out, there are some legal implications for not passing along, and if you're citing things that are saying, well, these are unprofitable, but the overall category is very profitable, what are those areas, specific items, that you're not giving enough discount for?
I would not characterize it as not giving enough discount. The discounts are greater than the avoided costs, which is one factor to consider. We're also evaluating the net contribution of, for example, first-class mail letters, which is very high, and the potential effect on customers if we reduce the discounts, effectively increase the prices for those customers. Categories such as standard mail flats, which are a fairly work-shared category, do have fundamental cost challenges that we're addressing through
Are there
operational...
specific categories or specific pieces of mail that we're not giving enough of a work-share discount to?
I think there are specific categories of mail where we need to very seriously consider the effect
You can't name any right off the top of your head right now, because you named some that you felt like, periodicals and that sort of thing.
I think the first-class mail is a category where we have high profits. It's a very profitable source of mail for the Postal Service. I would not characterize the discounts
And you won't be
as being
seeking
too small.
a rate increase in those categories, correct?
No, when we look at increasing prices through the exigent price mechanism, we will be looking at increasing prices for all mail.
Even if it's in that most profitable area?
Yes, first-class mail is contributing about 70% of the contribution to institutional costs of the Postal Services. Given the Postal Service's financial condition, we can't afford not to increase the prices of that mail as well as the prices of other categories.
If the volume had stayed the same, would we be having this same discussion, or is it directly related to volume?
It is in part related to volume and to the pressures in the industries in which our first-class mailers do business. But given the financial pressures on the Postal Service, we believe that
But I'm saying that those financial pressures, if the volume had remained the same, and I understand and appreciate that we've taken a precipitous dip, if they had stayed the same, would we be having the same discussion? Would there need to be this discussion happening?
I think if the volume had remained the same, the financial circumstances facing the Postal Service would obviously be substantially
Would we still be
different.
upside down, do you think, or
in
the red?
If volume had remained the same, there are some pressures on the Postal Service financially associated with retiree health benefits and some other fundamental issues with at least the secular decline associated with electronic diversion. If the volume remained the same, I think the Postal Service would be moving forward on a typical schedule for price increases under the price cap.
One of the things, Mr. Chairman, that I still struggle with is clearly in your testimony on just the basic economics, you say raising prices will reduce volume.
Yes.
But you also say at the same time one of the biggest challenges or opportunities, if you will, for the Postal Service is to increase volume. And that's where there's a disconnect that I just worry about the accounting of how we try to go and institute. It's the basic question. It's the multi-billion-dollar question. I realize how difficult it is to come to the conclusion. Mr. Waller, I want to give you, I've only got seconds here, but is there anything that you'd like to address in the questions that I asked? I'm sorry I didn't.
Yes. In the ACD, if you look in Chapter 7, there's a list of all the products that are either above or below or equal to avoided costs.
And is there anything in that list that you think arises above and beyond what the legal prescription is for?
Well, there are those that are greater that are greater than 100%, and that's the legal prescription that is in the PAEA.
But there are some that are in excess of 100%.
Yes, there are. There were the 14 that we identified, and they are.
Let me just add
there.
this to the record.
Yes, and there are some big volumes there too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Congressional Research Service report entitled Postage Subsidies for Periodicals, History and Recent Developments, dated January 22nd, 2009. I'd like to add that to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman for Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just had discussion about the fact that the pricing of certain items, magazines, catalogs, might raise antitrust issues. Making a profit rather than taking a big loss might raise antitrust issues. Has that issue ever been adjudicated?
Not to my knowledge.
And I think the area of concern is in the work sharing discounts. If it's equal to 100%, you're sort of neutral on the whether the Postal Service does it or competitors. Now, a lot of businesses have come into existence, like consolidators, and they make their money by getting lots of mailers mailed together and doing it at cheaper than the Postal Service, sharing that with the mailer, and they depend upon a fair discount in order to stay in existence. So I think that's where some of the charges a competitive world has been set up in mail processing, and if that gets restricted. Now, the Commission has not been involved in any decisions on that I'm aware of.
But it just seems to me that when we're losing $7 or $8 billion a year of taxpayer money, frankly, revisiting some of those assumptions and some of those nice things to do for competition might be in order. Because our first obligation isn't to private sector competition. While we welcome that, it is to the taxpayers who are ending up, helping to subsidize these losses.
I'd just like to point out that the Postal Service does not receive taxpayer dollars. Our revenue comes from the postage that our customers pay.
Well, all right. Those customers are our constituents. And they're still subsidizing those losses. Otherwise, you wouldn't, periodically when we have hearings like this, be bringing those losses to our attention and the need for urgent action. Your testimony, Ms. Robinson, notes 3 products, periodicals, mail flats, and standard mail parcels, fell short of covering their cost by $1.4 billion last year. The PRC's most recent annual compliance determination cautioned against less than average price increases for loss-making products without a plan for increasing net revenue in the long run. Does the Postal Service currently have a long-term plan to ensure that those products increase in net revenue?
Yes, the Postal Service is developing a long-term plan to address those issues. We are going to be increasing the prices of the products that are not covering their costs in a measured way to address the issue while maintaining limiting the effect on the customer base.
So you're working on a long-term plan?
We are developing a long-term plan that will include a price increase using the exigent price mechanism that will be filed with the Postal Regulatory Commission later this year.
Any idea when we might expect to see that long-term plan?
That will be at the decision of the Board of Governors. We should be seeing it relatively shortly.
Relatively shortly, okay. The chairman talked about the Workshare discounts, and again, the PRC, in its annual compliance determination, found that 30 of those Workshare discounts exceeded their avoided costs. 17 of them justified under statutory exceptions, 13 not justified. How do we intend to go about correcting those 13?
The Postal Service believes it justified the Workshare discounts that exceeded avoided cost, largely based on the potential effect on the efficiency of the Postal Service.
I'm sorry, Ms. Robinson, I cannot hear you.
I'm sorry. The Postal Service believes it justified those discounts based on the efficiency exception within the statute. Reducing those discounts, effectively increasing the prices for those products, would cause a reduction in volume that we are concerned would substantially reduce the volume through our system and hamper the efficiency of the system. So we believe we've addressed the issues surrounding those discounts.
Thank you. Mr. Waller, I'm going to run out of time, so let me ask quickly. In general, how often ought rate adjustments be made to realign avoided costs with the Workshare discounts?
Well, we're on a sort of a yearly cycle now because that's the way the costs come together. Very expensive to find out what each product costs, what each activity costs, and there are a lot of surveys and things that go on. So we're sort of tied into an annual cycle, and that probably is appropriate because you will catch it before it goes on too long. Last year, at the beginning of the year, there were a lot of the discounts that were exactly equal to 100%. actual mail processing costs dropped, and therefore the discounts were too large then. It was caught this year, and the adjustments can be made in this next rate case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you all for being here today. And I just want to, Dr. Riley, who's going to, we're going to hear from in the next panel, says that, and in his testimony, and I quote, he says, in the 1990s, management began to view the primary customer of the post office as the larger mailer instead of the individual customer. These representatives focus on obtaining discounts for their clients, the large mailers, and or converting first-class mail to less expensive categories of mail. End of quote. And I wanted to give you all a chance to respond to that. What do you think of that? Do you agree with him?
During the 1990s, we did see a substantial growth in commercial mail in what would be considered to be the work-shared categories. That was in part in response to incentives that the Postal Service put forward through the Workshare discount program. That mail helped to drive the automation program in the Postal Service that kept costs low for all customers, including the individual household customer. So there's been a large expansion of the efficiency of the Postal Service that has been in part enabled by the existence of very high quality clean mail that efficiently runs in operations that helps to keep the total cost of processing mail down. The Postal Service looks at the typical household mailer as very important to us. That's our fundamental customer base, and we're very interested in preserving the mail for the typical household customer. And in part, we need to do that by preserving the financial stability of the Postal Service and managing our pricing and product structures for commercial customers so they stay in the mail to enable the typical household customer to continue to be able to have a viable Postal Service for the future.
Mr. Waller, you had a response to that?
Yes, the importance of having the discount equal avoided costs is that it doesn't put the burden of the discount on the small mailer, on the individual mailer. No other mailer has to pick up that extra institutional cost that might be given away by having a discount larger than the avoided cost. I think that's why it got put in the Act, that the Commission should ensure that doesn't occur. That's the way to protect not only the small single-piece mailer, but all the other mailers in the system too.
And Mr. Waller, you testified that the Postal Service has had a long-standing cost control problems with the handling of mail flats. Is that right?
Yes.
And would you give me a little bit more explanation on that? What does that?
Well, the reason I say long-standing is back when I was first kind of with the Commission in 2000. It was the tracking the costs, and periodicals were still going up at that time, and they're mainly flats. So the Commission said, Postal Service, send over some witness, explain what's going on. And basically what was happening is that the automation or mechanical processing equipment wasn't really helping that much. A lot was still being manually sorted, and the promise was, well, we got a new system coming, the AFS M100. It did help a lot, but still those costs seem to spiral out with too much manual sorting and too expensive handling costs on the flats. Now the answer is supposedly in the FSS, but we'll have to see the flats sequencing system, if that actually produces any savings. It just has maintained itself as a high cost of handling flats. It hasn't gotten a handle on it yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also state that due to the continual changes in the postal operations, it's necessary to periodically review how Workshare costs are developed. And who conducts those reviews?
The Commission does. We have order or procedures for what data the Postal Service is to provide so that we can track those costs. And as I said a moment ago, what happened in 2009, some of those avoided costs, the Postal Service found a way to perform them in a less expensive way. So the cost avoided were less. So therefore, the discounts should be dropped, should be appropriately adjusted. And it's on that grounds that you have to continually look at that, because if suddenly something becomes operational, some magical way of processing, you want to build that in as costs are less now, let's give less discounts.
I see my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for conducting this hearing. Ms. Robinson, we recently held hearings in this committee regarding the Postal Service's uncertain financial future. In your opinion, how much do issues with Workshare discounts factor into the service's financial woes? Any contributing factors?
Clearly, you need to evaluate all pricing in relation to the Postal Service's financial position. I'd like to observe for the majority of first-class mail Workshare, which is most of the Workshare mail, we are actually making 5 cents more per piece for that mail than we do on single-piece mail. This is highly profitable mail, and continuing that Workshare program is very important for the Postal Service. Some categories that are cost-challenged, such as standard mail flats, are very heavily work-shared. We're looking at addressing those issues over time.
Okay, it has been reported that the Postal Service predicts the rate increase being proposed through the exigent circumstances appeal is moderate. Can you elaborate on this assessment?
The Postal Service's governors are evaluating the current situation, are going to be making a decision on the size of the increase. That will be announced in the near future. At the moment, we do believe the circumstances facing the Postal Service meet the exigent conditions. They are extraordinary. These are really dramatically challenging financial times for our customers.
So do you think there will be a rate increase and it'll make up for the difference?
As we announced on March 2nd, we are planning a rate increase in early 2011.
Okay. In July of 2009, the Postal Service filed a request with the PRC to alter their revenue analyst method. Can you explain what this methodology has to do with Workshare costs and the Postal Service's financial viability?
The revenue, I'm sorry?
It's called they filed a request with the PRC to alter their revenue analysis methods. You're not familiar with that? Okay, well, look, I'll go on to the next question then. Mr. Waller, can you respond to that?
Well, last year we talked about you have to relook at these costs all the time. The Postal Service last year filed 30 different requests for modification the way costs are calculated. 29 of those, in fact, were approved. One was denied. But so that's an ongoing process. But they came in through the year, some of them in July, some of them earlier and later.
Okay, a question for either one, and both of you can tackle it if you like. How much do products which do not cover their attributable costs factor into the financial hardships of the Postal Service? How much of that adds to your deficit?
In fiscal year 2009, the products that did not cover their costs cumulatively lost $1.7 billion.
And the overall loss to the Postal Service was how much for that?
About $3.8 billion.
Okay, so it's almost a half, or
yes,
a little over a half. Go ahead. You can.
Pardon me?
No, I agree with that. And not only did they not cover their costs, then they did not create an extra contribution to the institutional cost, which is part of the Act, too. They're supposed to make a reasonable contribution to institutional costs. So those products actually had a larger impact.
Okay, how can how can Workshare issues be addressed overall to ensure that the Postal Service gets maximum productivity? How do we address that, Mr. Waller?
When we look at our customers, we need to look at what they're using the mail to do. We're talking a lot in terms of discounts, price differences between different categories of mail. In reality, our customers pay prices. They pay dollars out of their pocket to mail to accomplish their business objectives. As we look at improving the financial condition of the Postal Service, we need to keep the mail affordable for those customers. We need to weigh the efficiency concerns around Workshare discounts. We need to weigh the fact that our customers have a lot of alternatives to the mail. The number of electronic possibilities for sending a bill, a statement, the information that would be in a newspaper or magazine is growing. And we need to consider that as we price our products.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Let me ask you, in light of the gentleman's question, the $1.7 billion delta here in terms of products that do not support the cost of delivery. So we're losing money on certain aspects. I know that Congress very early after the establishment of the Postal Service at the very birth of our country made some conscious policy decisions back then that newspapers and periodicals, because they had an informative dimension to them that served the public purpose. This was back in a day where they did not have radio, they didn't have TV, they didn't have 25 news stations, they didn't have the internet. Congress made a decision back then as public policy that we needed to subsidize newspapers and periodicals because that's how the populace was informed. That was the decision 200 years ago. Today, you know, you can click around and it's just nonstop news, every single channel. You've got the internet, all kinds of blogs and websites, and you know, radio. You've got you know, an abundance of sources for informing the electorate, our citizenry. In light of that change in technology and our daily lives, are we still justified in granting discounts to newspapers and periodicals that the cost of which is borne by others who are paying the freight for those periodicals and newspapers? Do you think, as a policy decision, it remains justified?
Over the history of the Postal Service, Congress has made a number of decisions that have promoted the editorial content within magazines and newspapers. For example, the periodical prices right now for mailing editorial content are much lower than for the advertising portion of the mail. In the early to mid-1990s, a decision was made by Congress that periodicals should no longer be directly subsidized through appropriations, and that product should cover its costs through the prices paid. However, the public policy goals of promoting the dissemination of information and news has been maintained through the pricing structure of periodicals.
Okay, I understand that. What I was asking you is, in light of the fact that we now have the internet, we have radio, we have TV that we didn't have when we adopted that policy, can it still be justified given the fact that other ratepayers, other mailers, other customers of the post office are subsidizing newspapers?
The role of periodicals in American society is really one of disseminating information. I think there's a lot of value for that to the American people. When we survey customers, the folks that receive the mail, they get a lot of value and use out of the mail from finding that periodical that they requested in their mailbox. A periodical is one of the few things that people actually pay to receive. That value in the mailbox is important for the Postal Service to keep our customers interested in valuing the mail that they receive.
Yeah, I understand that. I guess we're not really getting at the question, though. There are a lot of good things that are out there for people that are provided by the private sector without subsidy. They actually pay for stuff, and they pay full price for that item, for that information, for the internet, radio, TV, and But this is a special category that we set out early on at the birth of this country that we were going to subsidize through the Postal Service the dissemination of periodicals and newspapers. And I'm just asking you, as a public policy position, whether that is still justifiable given the fact that there's all kinds of other sources of information out there and that are available to the public that serve this purpose and are not subsidized by the Postal Service.
The Postal Service is looking at adjusting periodicals prices so they do cover their costs. We're concerned about the potential effect on the periodicals industry if we did that all in one step. At the end of the day, there is a public policy decision that is framed and discussed in the terms that Congress has established for periodicals pricing, which does recognize in law the fact that the educational, scientific, and informational value of the mail is important and needs to be considered within the prices we charge for periodicals mailing.
Thank you. Mr. Waller?
Well, it's in the law, and the Commission is focused on following the law and considering, and it's always been those factors have been there. I think that's a policy decision that Congress needs to address more than someone like the Commission. But in some of our hearings, we have had very lively debates about this issue that you are talking about right now, where the various mailers, in fact, came with a complaint to the Commission that a few years ago that the pricing of periodicals was not appropriate given all the changes that you
look, in a perfect world, I guess, and if we were making boatloads of money at the post office, we probably wouldn't be having this hearing. But I'm worried about the pension benefits, the health care benefits for these workers, and just trying to stabilize this system. And here is this somewhat of a luxury that I know we've always done it this way, but times have changed enormously, and the justification and the underpinnings for our policy have certainly eroded over time with the abundance of media.
The Commission, back the last time that we set rates before the PAA came into effect, made some fairly dramatic increases in changes in the pricing structure to get what was perceived as maybe a fairer sharing of the burden of the periodicals costs among all the mailers there. That was sort of trying to address things are changing, maybe the pricing structure does need to change, and some were put into effect. They did have some negative impacts, and the Commission was criticized very heavily for some of those decisions. So I'd say the policy reasons are very alive out there for continuing this. The American public does seem to still want the special treatment for this, at least several of the groups that participate in this industry.
Okay, I have overstayed my time. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd talk about nonprofit mailers, if I could, for a second. Very similar to what the Chairman was talking about. Give me a sense of the size and scope and the subsidy that really the American people are making for nonprofit mailers. Nonprofit
standard mailers typically pay 60%